The town was small and quiet, the kind of place where people knew each other by face even if they didn't always know each other's names. The streets were lined with old trees, and the houses stood close together, most of them simple and a little worn from time. Life moved slowly there. Nothing ever felt rushed. Most days looked the same as the day before. In one of those small houses lived a girl and her mother. Their home was not large, but it was warm and clean. The furniture was old, some of it repaired many times, but everything had its place. The girl had grown up in that house watching her mother work harder than anyone she knew. Her mother woke up before the sun came up almost every day. She worked long hours cleaning offices and helping at a small restaurant in town. The work was tiring, but she never complained. Even when she came home late, she still found the energy to ask her daughter about school, about her day, and about the little things that mattered to her. The girl noticed these things even when she was very young. She noticed the way her mother tried to hide her tired hands. She noticed the way she smiled even when she looked exhausted. And she noticed how her mother always said the same thing before leaving for work. "Study well. Your future will be better." Those words stayed in the girl's mind. School was not easy for her at first, but she tried her best. She liked reading and listening to stories, but what she loved most were the moments when the school music teacher played the old piano in the classroom. The piano was not beautiful. Its wood was scratched, and some of the keys made strange sounds. But when it was played, something in the girl's heart felt calm and alive at the same time. She didn't know how to explain it. Sometimes after class ended, she would sit quietly in the room just to hear the last few notes echo in the air. One afternoon, while walking home, she passed by the town's small community center. The building had been there for many years. It was used for meetings, small events, and sometimes classes. The door was open that day. Curious, she stepped inside. The room was mostly empty except for a few chairs stacked in the corner and a table covered with papers. Near the far wall stood an old piano. It looked even older than the one at school. For a moment, she simply stared at it. She slowly walked closer, almost like she was afraid it might disappear if she moved too quickly. The keys were a little yellow from age, and the wood had faded in places. But to her, it still looked wonderful. She looked around the room. No one seemed to be there. Carefully, she sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She hesitated for a second, then gently pressed one key. A soft sound filled the quiet room. Her eyes widened. She pressed another key, then another. The notes were simple and unorganized, but the sound made her smile without even realizing it. That day she stayed only a few minutes before leaving. But something inside her had already changed. The next day after school, she walked past the community center again. The door was closed. She stood there for a moment, wondering if she should go home. But just as she was about to turn away, someone inside opened the door. It was an older worker who helped take care of the building. The girl politely asked if she could come in for a few minutes. The worker looked at her with mild curiosity but nodded. "Just don't make too much noise," he said with a small smile. She walked straight to the piano. That afternoon she pressed the keys again, slowly, carefully, trying to remember the sounds she liked the most. Day by day, she returned. Sometimes the room was busy with meetings, and she could not play. Other days it was quiet, and she would sit at the piano for long stretches of time. At first, the music was simple and uneven, but she was patient. She began paying attention to the way melodies moved. She listened closely whenever music played anywhere. In school, in stores, even on the radio. Then she tried to copy what she heard. Little by little, the sounds she made started to feel more like real music. The worker who managed the center sometimes stopped by the room and listened quietly from the doorway. At first he thought it was just a child pressing random keys. But after a few weeks, he noticed something surprising. The girl was improving. She didn't rush. She didn't show off. She simply sat there with full concentration, practicing again and again. One evening he asked her, "Did someone teach you to play?" She shook her head. "I just listen," she said. He looked at the piano, then back at her. "Well, keep listening," he replied. The girl smiled. At home, she rarely talked about the piano. Her mother already worked so hard, and she didn't want to ask for anything extra. There was no money for music lessons or instruments anyway. But late at night, when her mother finally returned from work, the girl sometimes imagined what it would be like to play music just for her. She pictured her mother sitting in a chair, listening quietly. And when the music ended, her mother would smile the same warm smile she always had. That thought became her biggest motivation. Every day after school, she continued practicing. Months passed. Her fingers moved more confidently now. She had learned how different keys sounded together. She had discovered melodies that made people stop and listen. Sometimes visitors in the community center would pause outside the room. They would look inside, surprised to see a quiet young girl playing such emotional music. But the girl never noticed the attention. Her focus was always on the piano. One evening as she played, the sunlight from the window slowly faded, filling the room with soft shadows. The notes floated through the quiet hall, gentle and steady. The worker who managed the center stood by the door again, listening. He shook his head slightly in amazement. He had seen many people try that piano over the years, but something about the way the girl played felt different. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it special. The girl finished the melody and sat still for a moment, her hands resting lightly on the keys. In her mind, she imagined her mother sitting in the front row of a small room, watching proudly. She didn't want fame. She didn't care about applause. She only wanted one moment, one performance, one chance to play something beautiful for the person who had given up so much for her. And deep in her heart, she believed that one day, somehow that moment would come. After that evening, the girl continued visiting the community center almost every day. It slowly became part of her routine. School ended in the afternoon, and instead of going straight home, she walked the familiar path to the old building with the quiet hallway and the worn piano waiting inside. The weather changed as the weeks passed. Some days were bright and warm, while others were cloudy and cold. But no matter what the day looked like, she still made the same walk. The moment she stepped inside the building, she felt calm. The outside world seemed to fade away, and the only thing that mattered was the piano. At first, she only played simple notes and small melodies she remembered from school. But over time, her ears became sharper. She started noticing how music worked. She began to understand how some notes sounded gentle together while others created stronger feelings. Without realizing it, she was slowly teaching herself. Sometimes she would play the same short melody again and again, trying to make it sound better each time. If one note sounded wrong, she stopped and tried again. She was patient with herself. She didn't rush, and she never got angry at the piano. There was something peaceful about the way she practiced. The older worker who managed the center noticed this too. Many people had touched that piano before, but most of them only played for a few minutes. They would press the keys loudly, laugh, and walk away. This girl was different. She treated the instrument with care, almost like it was something alive. One afternoon he walked into the room while she was playing a slow melody. He stood quietly for a few moments, listening. The music was soft, but it carried a deep feeling. "You come here a lot," he said gently when the melody ended. The girl looked up and smiled politely. "Yes," she replied. "You really like music, don't you?" She nodded. He leaned against the wall and looked at the piano. "That instrument has been here longer than I have," he said with a light laugh. "Most people forgot about it." The girl placed her hands back on the keys and pressed a few gentle notes. "I think it still sounds beautiful," she said quietly. The worker smiled. "Well, it certainly sounds better when you play it." The girl felt a little shy hearing that. She wasn't used to compliments. She simply nodded and continued practicing. Days turned into months. Her fingers became faster and more confident. She learned to move across the keyboard smoothly. When she played, the music no longer sounded like random notes. It began to sound like real songs filled with emotion. Sometimes people walking through the community center would stop outside the room. They would quietly peek inside, surprised to see a young girl playing such beautiful music on an old piano. A few of them stayed to listen until she finished. But the girl didn't play for them. Most of the time, she didn't even realize anyone was there. Her thoughts were always somewhere else. Often she imagined her mother sitting nearby. She pictured her mother resting after a long day of work, listening to the music with a peaceful smile. That image stayed in her mind every time she practiced. At home, life continued the same way it always had. Her mother still woke up early every morning and returned home late at night. Some evenings she looked especially tired, but she still tried to spend a few minutes talking with her daughter before going to rest. They often ate simple meals together at the small kitchen table. Sometimes they talked about school, and sometimes they simply enjoyed the quiet. One night, while washing dishes, the girl heard her mother sigh softly. It wasn't a loud sigh, but it sounded heavy. The girl turned around. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her mother quickly smiled. "Yes, I'm fine. Just a long day." The girl nodded, but something in her heart felt a little sad. She wished there was something she could do to make her mother feel happy and relaxed. That thought stayed with her the next day while she practiced. As she played the piano, she imagined the music reaching her mother after a long day of work, like a quiet gift meant only for her. She started focusing more on melodies that sounded warm and comforting. One afternoon, the worker from the community center entered the room carrying a small box of papers. He placed them on a nearby table and sat down in a chair to listen for a moment. The girl was playing a gentle piece she had been practicing for several days. When she finished, he clapped softly. "That sounded wonderful," he said. The girl looked surprised. "Thank you," she replied. He thought for a moment before speaking again. "You know, next month the community center will have a small event," he said. "People from the neighborhood come to share different talents. Music, poetry, small performances. It's nothing fancy, just a friendly gathering." The girl listened quietly. He continued, "You should think about playing there." Her eyes widened slightly. "Me?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "You've been practicing here for so long. I think people would really enjoy hearing you." For a moment she didn't answer. The idea felt both exciting and frightening at the same time. Playing alone in an empty room felt safe. Playing in front of people felt completely different. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. The worker nodded kindly. "That's okay. Just think about it." After he left, the girl sat quietly at the piano bench. The room was silent except for the faint sound of voices in the hallway. She looked down at the keys. The thought of performing in front of others made her nervous. What if she made a mistake? What if the music didn't sound the way she hoped? But then another thought slowly appeared in her mind. What if her mother could be there? What if this event became the moment she had been dreaming about for so long? She imagined her mother sitting in the audience, watching her play a full piece from beginning to end. Her heart started beating faster. That night at home, she watched her mother carefully. Her mother was folding laundry after returning from work, moving slowly because of how tired she looked. The girl felt a strong wish grow inside her. She didn't want to wait forever for the right moment. Maybe the moment was already coming. The next afternoon, she returned to the community center earlier than usual. The worker was near the entrance organizing some chairs. She walked up to him, holding her school bag tightly. "About the event you mentioned," she said. He looked up. "Yes." She took a small breath. I would like to try." The worker's face brightened with a warm smile. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "I'll add your name to the list." The girl nodded, but as she walked toward the piano room, her hands felt slightly cold with nervousness. She sat at the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. This time her practice felt different. Every note mattered more. Every melody needed to carry the feeling she wanted to share. Because now she wasn't just practicing for herself. She was preparing for a moment that meant everything to her. A moment when her mother would finally hear the music that had been growing quietly in that small room for months. And somewhere deep inside, the girl hoped that when that moment arrived, the music would say all the things she had never found the words to express. After adding her name to the list for the community center event, the girl felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. The moment she had imagined for so long was finally getting closer, but now that it felt real, she began to question herself. Every afternoon she still walked to the community center, but her steps felt a little heavier than before. The piano room looked the same as always, yet the feeling inside her was different. Before, she played simply because she loved music. Now she was preparing for something important. She sat down at the old piano and rested her fingers on the keys. For a moment she didn't play anything. She just looked at the keyboard and took a slow breath. Then she began. The melody started softly, the same piece she had been practicing again and again. It was a gentle song, one that slowly grew stronger as it moved forward. She had chosen it carefully because it reminded her of the feeling of coming home after a long day. As she played, she imagined her mother sitting somewhere nearby, listening quietly. But suddenly her fingers slipped on one note. The sound felt wrong. She stopped immediately. For a few seconds she stared at the keys, disappointed. Before signing up for the event, mistakes like that never bothered her much. But now every small error felt bigger than before. What if that happens during the performance? She whispered to herself. The thought made her heart beat faster. She shook her head and started again from the beginning. This time she played slower, paying close attention to every note. The music filled the room gently, and little by little her confidence returned. The worker who managed the community center passed by the doorway during her practice and listened for a moment. "You're working very hard these days," he said kindly. The girl looked up and smiled a little. "I want it to sound right," she replied. He nodded. "Music doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful," he said. "Sometimes feeling is more important than perfection." His words stayed in her mind long after he walked away. Still, she continued practicing every day. As the event got closer, the community center became busier. Volunteers moved chairs into the large hall. Small decorations appeared along the walls. A list of performers was placed near the entrance. When the girl passed by that list one afternoon, she stopped and looked at it carefully. Her name was there among several others. Some were singers. Others planned to perform poetry or small musical pieces. Seeing her name written on the paper made everything feel even more real. For a moment her stomach tightened with nervousness. But she reminded herself why she had signed up in the first place. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about her mother. That evening at home, she watched her mother carefully while they ate dinner. Her mother looked especially tired that day. She moved slowly and rubbed her hands as if they were sore from work. The girl felt a quiet determination growing inside her. She wanted to give her mother a moment of peace. Just one moment where she could sit down and relax without worrying about anything. After dinner, her mother sat on the couch for a few minutes before going to bed early. The girl looked at her and said softly, "There's going to be a small event at the community center soon." Her mother looked up with curiosity. "An event?" "Yes," the girl said. "People will share different talents. Music and things like that." Her mother smiled gently. "That sounds nice. Maybe we can go watch." The girl felt her heart skip a beat. She nodded, trying not to show how excited she suddenly felt. "Yes," she said quietly. "You should come." Her mother didn't know that her daughter would be performing. The girl decided to keep it a surprise. Over the next few days, she practiced more carefully than ever before. Sometimes she stayed at the community center until the evening light faded through the windows. One afternoon while she played, two visitors walking through the hall stopped outside the door. They listened quietly for a minute. "I didn't expect to hear music like that here," one of them said softly. The girl heard the comment but continued playing without looking up. After the melody ended, they quietly clapped before moving on. Moments like that made her feel both proud and nervous at the same time. If strangers could hear her, then soon a full room of people would too. And most important of all, her mother would be there. As the event day approached, the community center hall slowly transformed. Rows of chairs were arranged facing a small stage area where the piano had been moved. The girl saw the stage for the first time 2 days before the event. The sight made her pause. The piano looked different sitting there under the lights. It no longer felt like the quiet instrument hidden in a practice room. Now it looked like something important. She walked closer and gently touched the keys. The hall felt much bigger than the small practice room she was used to. What if I get nervous? She wondered. The worker who managed the center noticed her standing there. First time seeing the stage? He asked with a friendly smile. She nodded. It feels big, she admitted. He laughed softly. It always feels big before the performance, he said. But once the music starts, everything else disappears. She hoped he was right. The night before the event, she practiced longer than usual. The building had become quiet as most people went home. The soft lights in the hall created long shadows across the floor. She sat at the piano and played the full piece again and again. Each time she imagined the audience sitting in the chairs. Each time she imagined her mother somewhere in the front row. By the final run-through, the melody flowed smoothly from beginning to end. When she finished, she stayed seated for a moment, letting the last notes fade into silence. Her hands rested lightly on the keys. In her mind, she pictured the moment when the music would finally reach her mother's ears. Not just any music. The music she had been practicing for months in that quiet room. A small smile appeared on her face. Tomorrow would be the day. The next morning arrived faster than she expected. School felt longer than usual because her thoughts kept returning to the evening event. When the final bell rang, she walked home slowly, trying to stay calm. At home, she prepared quietly while her mother got ready to leave for work for a short shift before the event. Don't forget, her mother said before leaving. We'll go to the community center tonight. The girl nodded. I remember. The hours passed slowly. When the evening finally arrived, the streets around the community center began filling with people from the neighborhood. Families, friends, and curious visitors walked inside, chatting and finding seats. The girl arrived early and waited backstage in a small room. From there, she could hear the crowd talking softly in the hall. Her hands felt slightly cold. She rubbed them together gently. This was the moment she had been preparing for. But suddenly the thought of playing in front of so many people felt overwhelming. Then she remembered something important. She wasn't playing for the crowd. She was playing for one person, her mother. And somewhere out in that growing audience, her mother was about to sit down, completely unaware that the performance she would hear tonight had been prepared just for her. The community center looked very different that evening. Soft lights filled the large hall, and rows of chairs were already occupied by people from the neighborhood. Families sat together, friends chatted quietly, and children whispered excitedly while looking toward the small stage. At the center of that stage stood the old piano. It had been cleaned carefully, and the lights above it made the worn wood shine a little brighter than usual. For the first time in many years, the instrument looked like the most important object in the room. Backstage, the girl waited quietly. The small waiting area behind the stage was simple. A few chairs were placed against the wall, and several performers sat there preparing for their turns. Some were humming softly, others were reading papers or stretching their hands. The girl sat near the corner, her hands resting in her lap. From where she was sitting, she could hear the voices of the audience on the other side of the curtain. The sound of so many people talking at once made her feel both excited and nervous. She slowly took a deep breath. This was the moment she had imagined many times while practicing alone in the quiet piano room. But imagining something and actually living it were two very different things. She tried to calm herself by thinking about the music instead of the crowd. One by one, the first performers went on stage. A singer began the event with a cheerful song. The audience clapped warmly. Then a young boy performed a short poem that made many people smile. Backstage, the girl listened carefully to every sound. Each round of applause reminded her that the room was full. After a while, she heard a familiar voice behind her. It was the older worker who managed the community center. He walked into the waiting area carrying a small list of performers. "You're doing all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her fingers were moving nervously against each other. He noticed and smiled kindly. "Feeling nervous is normal," he said. "Even people who perform for many years still feel that way." She looked up at him. "What if I make a mistake?" she asked quietly. He thought for a moment before answering. "Then you keep playing," he said simply. Music is not about never making mistakes. It's about what you do after them. His calm voice helped her feel a little better. He gave her an encouraging nod before returning to the stage area. A few more performances passed. The audience remained warm and supportive, clapping after every act. Finally, the worker stepped onto the stage again and looked at the list in his hand. Backstage, the girl felt her heart begin to beat faster. This next performance, the worker announced to the crowd, will be a piano piece. The girl stood up slowly. Her legs felt a little shaky, but she tried to walk calmly toward the stage entrance. The curtain was slightly open, allowing her to see a small part of the audience. Rows and rows of people filled the chairs. Then, near the front row, she saw someone she recognized immediately. Her mother. Her mother sat quietly with her hands resting in her lap, looking toward the stage with a gentle, curious expression. She had no idea that her daughter was about to perform. Seeing her there filled the girl with a strong wave of emotion. All the nervous thoughts that had been racing through her mind suddenly became quieter. She remembered the long days her mother worked. She remembered the tired smile her mother still gave every evening. And she remembered why she had started this journey in the first place. This moment was not about fear. It was about gratitude. The worker stepped backstage and gave her a small nod. "It's time," he said. The girl walked slowly onto the stage. At first the bright lights made it hard to see the audience clearly, but she could still feel their presence. The room grew quieter as people noticed her walking toward the piano. Some of them looked curious. After all, she was young and unfamiliar to most of them. She reached the piano bench and paused for a moment. Her hands rested gently on the edge of the instrument. Then she sat down. The hall became completely silent. From the front row, her mother leaned slightly forward, now recognizing her daughter on the stage. A look of surprise appeared on her face. The girl glanced up briefly and saw that expression. It made her heart warm. She turned back to the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then she pressed the first note. A soft sound floated through the hall. The next note followed, then another. The melody began quietly, like a gentle conversation starting in a calm room. The audience listened closely. Some people who had been whispering earlier now sat perfectly still. The girl continued playing. At first she focused only on the keys, making sure her hands moved the way she had practiced. But after a few moments, something wonderful happened. Her nervousness slowly disappeared. The music began to flow naturally. Her fingers moved with growing confidence across the keyboard. The melody grew stronger, filling the hall with warm and emotional sound. People in the audience exchanged surprised glances. No one had expected such beautiful music from someone so young. Each note carried feeling. Each phrase sounded sincere and heartfelt. The girl was no longer thinking about the crowd. She was thinking about her mother. Every part of the melody was played as if it was a message meant only for her. From the front row, her mother watched with wide eyes. At first she looked shocked, but slowly that surprise turned into something deeper. Pride. Her daughter continued playing, moving smoothly from one section of the piece to another. The music rose and fell like gentle waves. Some people in the audience leaned forward in their chairs. Others closed their eyes to listen more carefully. The hall remained completely silent except for the sound of the piano. Even the worker who managed the community center stood near the side of the stage, listening with a quiet smile. He had heard her practice many times, but hearing the music fill the entire hall felt different, much more powerful. As the melody continued, the girl felt a deep sense of calm. Months of practice had led to this moment. The old piano that once sat forgotten in a quiet room was now sharing its voice with an entire audience. And the girl who had once played alone was now telling her story through music. The piece moved toward its final section. The notes became richer and more emotional. Her fingers danced across the keys with confidence, carrying the melody to its highest point. Everyone in the room was completely focused. Not a single chair moved. Not a single voice spoke. The music held the entire audience in quiet attention. And in the front row, her mother watched with shining eyes, realizing that this performance was something truly special. The music continued to flow through the hall like a gentle river. The girl's fingers moved across the piano keys with growing confidence, and the melody filled every corner of the room. The old piano that had once been forgotten in a quiet room now sounded powerful and alive under the bright stage lights. No one in the audience moved. At the beginning of the performance, many people had been curious. Some had expected a simple tune. But now everyone understood that this moment was something special. The girl wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story through music. Her shoulders relaxed as she continued. The nervous feeling that had followed her backstage earlier had completely faded. The piano now felt familiar again, just like it did during the quiet afternoons in the community center. The only difference was that tonight the room was full. But strangely, that no longer frightened her. Instead, she felt surrounded by calm silence. The audience listened with full attention, almost as if they were afraid that even the smallest sound might interrupt the music. In the front row, her mother sat very still. At first, she had been surprised to see her daughter walk onto the stage. She had not known anything about this performance. But as the music continued, that surprise slowly turned into something deeper. Her eyes followed every movement of her daughter's hands. She could see the concentration in her face, the quiet confidence growing with each part of the melody. For a moment, the mother remembered the many evenings when she had come home tired from work. She had often worried about the future and about giving her daughter enough opportunities. Yet here she was now, watching her daughter create something beautiful in front of an entire room of people. The music grew stronger. The girl moved into the next part of the piece, where the melody rose with more emotion. Her fingers moved faster now, but every note remained clear and gentle. A few people in the audience exchanged surprised looks. One older man sitting near the middle of the room leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees as he listened more closely. Another woman placed her hand softly over her heart. The music carried a feeling that was hard to describe. It was not loud or dramatic, but it touched something quiet inside the listeners. The worker who managed the community center stood near the side of the stage, watching with a warm smile. He remembered the first time he had seen the girl sitting at the old piano months ago. At that time, she had been shy and careful, pressing each key slowly as if she was afraid of making noise. Now she sat on the stage with calm focus, filling the hall with music that held everyone's attention. He shook his head slightly in amazement. The girl continued playing. As the piece moved toward its final section, the melody became more emotional. The notes flowed together smoothly, creating a feeling of warmth and quiet strength. The girl allowed herself to look up for a brief moment. Her eyes found her mother again in the front row. Her mother's expression had changed. There was pride in her eyes, but there was also something else. Tears. Not tears of sadness, but tears that come when someone feels deeply moved. Seeing that made the girl's heart feel full. She returned her focus to the keys, letting the music carry that emotion forward. The final part of the piece approached. Her hands moved across the keyboard with steady rhythm, guiding the melody toward its ending. Every note seemed to echo slightly longer in the quiet hall. Some people in the audience had stopped blinking, completely absorbed in the moment. Even the children who had been whispering earlier now sat quietly. The music softened for a moment. Then the last section began. The melody rose gently one final time before slowly drifting downward, like a calm sunset at the end of a long day. The girl pressed the final notes with care. Each note faded softly into the air. And then the music ended. For a brief moment, the entire hall remained silent. The girl kept her hands resting lightly on the keys. She could hear her own breathing and feel her heartbeat slowly calming. Then suddenly the silence broke. Applause filled the room. Started with a few people clapping, but within seconds the entire audience joined in. The sound grew louder and louder, echoing through the hall. Some people even stood from their chairs. The girl looked up in surprise. She had hoped people would enjoy the music, but she had never expected such a strong reaction. The applause continued for several moments. On the side of the stage, the worker smiled proudly and clapped along with everyone else. The girl slowly stood from the piano bench. She gave a small, shy bow. The audience responded with even louder applause. But in the middle of all that noise, her eyes searched for only one person. Her mother was standing now. Her hands were clapping, but tears were still shining in her eyes. When their eyes met, her mother gave her a warm smile. That smile meant more than all the applause in the room. The girl felt a deep sense of happiness fill her chest. For months she had practiced in that quiet piano room, imagining this exact moment. And now it had finally happened. She had played the music she loved, and her mother had heard it. The applause slowly began to fade. The girl stepped away from the piano and walked toward the side of the stage. As she reached the curtain, the worker gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. She smiled, still feeling a little overwhelmed. "Thank you," she replied. From the stage entrance, she could still hear people in the audience talking about the performance. Some were saying they had never expected such music from a young performer. Others were asking each other where she had learned to play. But the girl wasn't thinking about those questions. Her thoughts were focused on something much simpler. In just a few moments, she would walk down into the crowd and see her mother face to face. And she already knew that the conversation they were about to share would be one of the most special moments of her life. The applause in the hall slowly began to fade, but the feeling in the room did not disappear. People were still smiling, whispering to each other, and looking toward the stage where the girl had just finished playing. Some were clearly surprised. Others simply looked moved by what they had heard. Behind the curtain, the girl stood quietly for a moment. Her hands were still slightly warm from playing, and her heart was beating faster than usual. It wasn't nervousness anymore. It was something closer to relief mixed with happiness. For months she had practiced alone in that small piano room. She had imagined this moment many times. But now that it had truly happened, it felt almost unreal. The worker who managed the community center walked over to her again. "You did wonderfully," he said with a proud smile. "Everyone loved it." The girl nodded shyly. She didn't quite know what to say. Before she could respond, another performer waiting backstage gently patted her shoulder. "That was beautiful," the performer said kindly. "Thank you," the girl replied softly. The voices from the hall continued drifting backstage. People were still talking about the performance. Some were asking each other who the young pianist was and where she had learned to play like that. The girl slowly stepped closer to the curtain and looked out. Her eyes immediately found her mother. Her mother was still standing near the front row, speaking briefly with someone sitting beside her. But even while talking, her eyes kept returning to the stage. There was still a look of wonder on her face. The girl took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the curtain. As soon as a few people noticed her walking down from the stage, they began clapping again. It was a lighter applause this time, but it was warm and welcoming. She walked slowly down the aisle. A few people smiled at her as she passed. One older woman nodded with admiration. A man near the middle row gave her a quiet thumbs up. The girl smiled politely but continued walking. Her focus was still on her mother. When she finally reached the front row, her mother turned toward her fully. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then her mother stepped forward and wrapped her in a tight hug. The girl felt the warmth of that embrace immediately. "You played that?" her mother asked softly, her voice full of emotion. The girl nodded while still in the hug. "Yes." Her mother pulled back slightly and looked at her again, almost as if she needed to see her daughter clearly to believe what had just happened. "I had no idea," her mother said. "How long have you been playing?" The girl hesitated for a moment before answering. "For a while," she said gently. Her mother looked confused but also amazed. "You never told me," she said. "I wanted it to be a surprise," the girl replied. Her mother smiled, though tears were still shining in her eyes. "Well, it certainly was." They both laughed softly. People nearby continued offering compliments as they passed by. A few audience members stopped to say how much they had enjoyed the music. "That was one of the best performances tonight," one man said kindly. "You have a real gift," another person added. The The girl thanked them politely each time, though she felt a little shy about so much attention. Eventually the crowd began slowly moving toward the exit as the event came to an end. The hall grew quieter again. The girl and her mother remained near the front row for a moment longer. Her mother gently held her hands. "When did you learn all of this?" she asked. The girl looked toward the stage where the old piano still stood. "At the community center," she said. Her mother followed her gaze. "That old piano?" The girl nodded. "I started going there after school sometimes." Her mother seemed surprised. "And you taught yourself?" "Mostly," the girl replied. Her mother shook her head slightly, still amazed. "All this time, and I never knew." The girl looked down for a moment. "I just wanted to play something for you," she said quietly. Her mother squeezed her hands gently. "You gave me something very special tonight," she said. The worker from the community center walked over to them with a friendly smile. "I see the two of you finally met after the performance," he said. Her mother turned to him. "You knew about this?" she asked. He nodded. "She's been practicing here for months," he explained. "Almost every afternoon." Her mother looked at her daughter again with even more pride. "I wish I had known sooner," she said softly. The worker chuckled lightly. "She wanted to surprise you." Her mother smiled warmly at that. Well, it worked. The three of them stood together for a few moments, chatting quietly while the last of the audience members left the hall. Soon the chairs began to empty completely, and volunteers started cleaning up the space. The girl looked once more at the piano on the stage. The same piano that had once stood quietly in a forgotten room had now filled the entire hall with music. It had helped her share something she had carried in her heart for a long time. Her mother noticed her looking. "You really love playing, don't you?" she asked. The girl nodded. "Yes." Her mother thought for a moment. "We'll find a way for you to keep learning," she said gently. The girl looked surprised. "You don't have to worry about that," she replied quickly. But her mother shook her head. "No," she said. "I want to." The girl felt another wave of warmth in her chest. They slowly walked toward the exit together. Outside, the night air felt cool and calm. The streetlights softly illuminated the quiet road. For a moment they simply stood there, enjoying the peaceful night after the busy event. Her mother looked at her again. "You know," she said, "I came here tonight expecting to watch a small event." She paused and smiled. "But instead, I watched my daughter do something incredible." The girl laughed shyly. "I was very nervous." "You didn't look nervous," her mother replied. They began walking home together down the quiet street. The town looked the same as it always had, but something about the night felt different. The girl felt lighter, as if a dream she had carried quietly for so long had finally taken shape. She had played the music she loved. She had shared it with her mother. And the moment had turned out even more beautiful than she had imagined. Neither of them spoke much during the walk home. They didn't need to. The memory of the music was still fresh in their minds, and the feeling it created would stay with them for a very long time. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life don't come from grand plans or big stages. Sometimes they come from simple wishes, quiet dedication, and the desire to give someone you love a moment they will never forget. And that night, a girl who only wanted to play music for her mother had done exactly that.